Congresswoman McKinney, Dr. Khan, Mr. McIlvaine, fellow citizens, it is an honor to be here today to discuss some of the most serious issues ever to present themselves before a free people. There are many things I do not need to say here today. Others will say them for all of us. Almost all of us are deeply aware of and disturbed by the glaring inconsistencies, the evidence tampering, the obstruction of justice, the nonfeasance, the malfeasance, and the other crimes represented by the final report of the Cheney Commission investigating the attacks of September the 11th. I will not digress to discuss them here, but for the record, I would like it noted that the entire membership of the Cheney Commission is horribly and blatantly compromised by often egregious conflicts of interest that would have made them ineligible for participation in the tribunal charged with rendering a full accounting of the events of 9/11. Their conduct in the discharge of their duties was a shameful and criminal affirmation of those vested interests. Since the day of the attacks, my newsletter From the Wilderness, reinforced by an incredible staff of writers and editors, has worked virtually nonstop to investigate those attacks and to produce reasonable answers based upon evidence that will help fill the enormous void left by mainstream news organizations, the Congress, and the Cheney Commission. As most of you know, my long-awaited book, Crossing the Rubicon, The Decline of the American Empire at the End of the Age of Oil, has just recently been completed, and even as we speak today, the printing is starting in Canada. So we're very happy to see that. I am especially. We have been accepting advance orders for a week, and the first shipment should go out by September 14th. So those of you who have been waiting for that book, which is 700 pages long with 1,000 footnotes, plenty for all of you to digest, challenge, and do whatever you want to do with, it'll be available for you shortly, and we certainly hope before November 2nd. I don't know why I'd say something like that. You can find information about the book at the website fromthewilderness.com. I believe that Crossing the Rubicon provides amply documented evidence with which to initiate and sustain a number of indictments of top-level government officials for their roles in facilitating the attacks of 9/11. Most notably, as my chief suspect, I name Vice President Richard Cheney as both a planner and executor of those attacks. In order to complete my book, I chose to focus on a clear and unmistakable evidentiary record based upon written records, statements of key officials, evidence presented under oath, and first-person interviews and investigations conducted by me directly in pursuit of information that discloses the truth about September the 11th. I chose to avoid discussion of physical evidence issues for two primary reasons. First, physical evidence arguments based upon photographic and other analyses are not directly court admissible without overcoming several hurdles. First, a clear and irrefutable chain of custody, backed up by affidavits or sworn testimony, is required to even get such evidence admitted at trial. Secondly, such evidence is by definition only presentable in court at a time presentable or identifiable in court or discussable in court by means of expert witness testimony, which is often subject to intense courtroom debate and judged only by the amount of money which can be brought to bear to produce experts to either validate or refute it. In writing Crossing the Rubicon, I decided that the primary audience that I wanted to reach was the American people as a whole. I thought it best to present them with a book that I could say was legally admissible in court on its face, since no interpretation was required and no chain of custody issues presented themselves with regards to footnotes or verifiable records. The possibility of evidence tampering has been removed, since all footnotes lead either to verifiable public record sources or are the work product of interviews conducted and recorded by me that I recount in the book as I would sworn testimony of a detective under oath. Since I have only 15 minutes to deliver my prepared remarks before going to questions, let me begin by briefly summarizing my findings, briefly, and disclosing information which has never been made public until today. Crossing the Rubicon is a detective story that gets to the innermost core of the 9/11 attacks. It places 9/11 at the center of a desperate new America created by specific named individuals in preparation for peak oil, an economic crisis like nothing the world has ever seen. It looks at the crime from the viewpoint of a homicide investigator who must, in order to establish guilt, examine and identify the motive, means, and opportunity for the commission of the crime. The attacks of September 11, 2001 were the pretext for the American and, to a lesser extent, the British and the Israeli empires to begin seizing by force those energy supplies needed to sustain their power, hegemony, whether regional or global, and their teetering economies. Both governments were involved well before the attacks occurred. The attacks of 9/11 were accomplished through an amazing orchestration of logistics and personnel. Former National Security Advisor and Counterterror Advisor Richard Clarke has postulated that such a conspiracy could never be kept a secret. Too many people would have been involved, he insisted in his recent book, Against All Enemies. On this point, I disagree with Clarke completely, and point to the fact that the Manhattan Project, which developed the atom bomb, and the stealth fighter project were both successfully kept secret. The numbers of people involved in both of those projects far exceeded the numbers of people within the United States government required to execute 9/11. However, I must express a deep debt of gratitude to Richard Clarke, for in his book he left a very compelling trail of breadcrumbs, contradictions to the sworn testimony and written records submitted, often under oath, of our highest leaders, and the hard evidence which provided me with the leads I needed to break open and answer the whodunit part of 9/11. For me, the pivotal evidence, absolutely demonstrating direct government complicity in and management of the attacks, was found in a number of undisputed yet virtually unaddressed war games that I have shown were being conducted, coordinated, and or controlled by Vice President Dick Cheney or his immediate staff on the morning of September the 11th. The names of those war games are known to include Vigilant Guardian, Vigilant Warrior, Northern Guardian, Northern Vigilance, and Tripod 2. There is a possibility that Northern Guardian is a duplicate name, but the remaining exercises are indisputably separate events with different objectives. All have been reported by major press organizations relying on undisputed quotes from participating military and FAA personnel. They have also been confirmed by NORAD press releases. All, except for Northern Vigilance and Tripod 2, had to do with hijacked airliners inside the continental United States, specifically within the Northeast Air Defense Sector or NEADS, where all 4 9/11 hijackings occurred. According to a clear record, some of these exercises involve commercial airline hijackings. In some cases, false blips or injects were deliberately inserted onto FAA and military radar screens, and they were present during at least the first attacks. Excuse me. This effectively paralyzed fighter response, because with only 8 fighters available in the region, there were as many as 22 possible hijackings taking place. Other exercises, specifically Northern Vigilance, had pulled significant fighter resources away from the Northeast U.S. just before 9/11 into northern Canada and Alaska. In addition, a close reading of key news stories published in the spring of 2004 revealed for the first time that some of these drills were live fly exercises, where actual aircraft, likely flown by remote control, were simulating the behavior of hijacked airliners in real life. All of this as the real attacks began. The fact that these exercises had never been systematically and thoroughly explored in the mainstream press, or publicly by Congress, or at least publicly in any detail whatsoever by the so-called independent 9/11 Commission, made me think that they might be the holy grail of 9/11. And that's exactly what they turned out to be. Only one war game exercise, Vigilant Guardian, was mentioned in a footnote to the Kane Commission report, and that it was deliberately mislabeled as an exercise intended to intercept Russian bombers instead of a hijack exercise in the Northeast sector. Even then, a deliberate lie was told to the American people as NORAD Commander General Ralph Eberhart testified to the Commission that the exercise actually expedited U.S. Air Force response during the attacks. Before the Commission's final hearing, I undertook a direct investigation in an attempt to learn more details about each of the exercises, and specifically who was controlling them or had planned them to take place on September the 11th. For it's abundantly clear, based upon the record of statements made by the U.S. Air Force and FAA personnel, that the games had effectively paralyzed fighter response during the attacks. While most of my queries, including the submission of direct written questions and telephone calls to NORAD, the Department of Defense, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, resulted in stonewalling, that's a kind word, and did little to help clarify this key issue, One military officer revealed information that was, to say the least, startling. It confirmed my findings. After several phone calls and lengthy emails laying out what I had uncovered, I received a written response from 1st Air Force Public Affairs Officer Major Don Arias. In that response, he confirmed that the Joint Chiefs of Staff had been conducting a live-fly hijack drill on the day of September the 11th. The name of that exercise, Vigilant Warrior, had been revealed by Richard Clark on page 9 of his book as he quoted a statement made to him by then acting Joint Chiefs Chairman Richard Myers. To excerpt from Major Arias' May 14, 2004 email addressed to me, Mr. Ruppert, the book is in the mail. That's an Air Force book which describes a completely different set of attacks than the one the Keene Commission investigated. The NORAD-wide exercise we were in on 9/11 was indeed Vigilant Guardian. I also learned something that may help you with your research. The terms used for NORAD exercises have specific meanings. Per NORAD Instruction 33-7, nicknames, quote, a combination of two separate unclassified words which is assigned an unclassified meaning and is employed for unclassified administration, morale, or public information. The first word must begin with the combination of letters of the alphabet allocated to the using agency. It's all mil-speak, as they call it. A nickname is used exclusively to designate a drill or exercise. Exercise terms are used to prevent confusion between exercise directives with actual operations. That's the key sentence because they have to separate the exercises from real life, at least they're supposed to. Vigilant or amalgam means it is a HQ and headquarters NORAD sponsored exercise. Guardian means it is a multi-command CPX or command post exercise, meaning there's no live fly. So on 9/11, NORAD was conducting NORAD-wide multi-command command post exercises with no live flies. This covers the radar injects that were present on the FAA radar screens throughout New England and the Northeast sector on that day. Other exercise terms include Warrior, JCS, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Headquarter NORAD, sponsored field training exercise, or FTX, or live fly. Because 1st Air Force CONAR is an intermediate level of command, I may have to refer your questions to HQ NORAD, but I'll do what I can. But what he said was, we have General Richard Myers saying, Vigilant Warrior, we're in the middle of it. Richard Clark wrote it in the book. A NORAD officer here confirms that that was a live fly hijack drill in progress during the attacks. Have you ever heard of that before? Any of you? The full text in this of this and other correspondence in my direct questioning of DOD and military personnel is included in Crossing the Rubicon. Major Arias is going to be mentioned again very quickly here. What we have in this instance is direct written confirmation of a live fly exercise that involved the actual piloting of aircraft either by remote control or with real pilots in the Northeast Air Defense Sector. There are multiple confirmations of this, which are in the book. Other exercises use the injects, confusing both FAA and NORAD radar screens. And this would account for well-documented confusion over what might have been 22 different possible hijackings. It was impossible for the FAA or the Air Force personnel to tell which was which. With only 8 fighter aircraft available, the inexplicable delays in fighter response are now easy to comprehend. When New York writer Michael Caine, who I believe is here today, wherever you are, Mike, God bless you, approached General Eberhardt on an FTW assignment for my newsletter at the conclusion of the Commission's last public hearing and asked for information on all the other exercises, including Vigilant Warrior, Eberhardt's only response was, no comment. Other government agencies have fallen back on a simple the exercises are classified excuse and failed to provide any clarification at all. Same with the Caine Commission, several members of which were also questioned by Mike Caine. Nobody would talk. There was also an additional non-military biowarfare exercise called Tripod 2 being set up in Manhattan on September 11th, and it was under the direct coordination of FEMA and by White House directive the immediate control of the Vice President, Richard Cheney. The setup for that exercise conveniently placed a fully staffed FEMA New York City Department of Justice command post on Manhattan's Pier 29, just in time for it to be conveniently used as the command post after the Twin Towers had collapsed. In reconstructing actual communications and chains of commands, I was extremely disturbed to find out that many officials in a position to take action that might have prevented the loss of life in the South Tower did not do so before Flight 175 became the second impact. This in spite of the fact that it was known and had been clearly communicated that Flight 175 had been off course, hijacked, and headed toward Manhattan for some 20 minutes. Included here are Vice President Richard Cheney, various NORAD officers and commanders, the FAA, and then Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. In examining transcripts of Giuliani's testimony before the Cheney Commission, I find clear evidence suggesting that Mayor Giuliani committed perjury when he appeared before the Cheney Commission this spring. It's interesting to note that of all 9/11 witnesses whose testimony I analyzed, his testimony remain to this day the only testimony which has not been transcribed and presented to the public. Instead, I was forced to rely on transcripts prepared from video and audio recordings by 9/11 activists and researchers. I will now quote from Crossing the Rubicon as to what my analysis of Giuliani's testimony revealed. It may explain why the Cheney Commission has deliberately withheld it from public view. I want to thank first Kyle Hentz and Joe Friendly, who provided me with a written transcript of Giuliani's remarks, which I might add was independently verified through other recordings. We began, according to Giuliani, sometime after Flight 77 struck the Pentagon. Quote, I had already been informed by my chief of staff that he had reached the White House and by the police commissioner, who I think had reached the Defense Department. I'm not sure exactly. But both of them had assured me that we had gotten air support because that's why I wanted to reach the White House. I wanted to make sure that we had air defense for the city. And my chief of staff told me that he was informed by the White House that there were 7 planes that were unaccounted for. At this point, I knew of 2, and I heard reports that the Pentagon had been attacked, that the Sears Tower had been attacked, and several other things. Now, who had told, I'm speaking now, who had told Giuliani about the 2 missing planes before this? Such information must have originated with NORAD, NEADS, or the FAA. Those communications channels were obviously functioning at that time, but then why no warning? The only likely explanation here is that lower command levels, knowing that the National Command Authority, the White House, and the Pentagon had taken command, assumed that the warnings would come from higher up and thus be more quickly heeded. Now we go back to Giuliani. So I got through to the White House. Chris Hennick was on the phone, who was the deputy political director to President Bush. And I said to him, Chris, was the Pentagon attacked? And he said, confirmed. Note, the Pentagon was struck at 9:41. And then I asked him if we had air support. I said, do we have air support? Do you have jets out? Because I think we're going to get hit again. He said, quote, the jets were dispatched 12 minutes ago and they should be there very shortly and they should be able to defend you against further attack. It's Christmas. Sorry. Jingle bells, okay. Against further attack. And then he said, we're evacuating the White House and the Vice President will call you back very shortly. Note a number of mainstream press accounts, this is me, fixed the White House evacuation order between 9:41 and 9:45. I think it was a lot earlier. But thus, there are 2 events fixing Giuliani's conversation with Hennick between 9:41 and 9:45. Are we to assume that no one in the White House had Giuliani's telephone number? He was a major player in the Republican Party, a strong supporter of George W. Bush. Why was he talking to a political director and not to the Pentagon or the Situation Room and the White House? Clark was there. Rice was there. The Situation Room was hooked up to NORAD, the Pentagon, the FAA, the FBI, everybody. He or somebody on his staff had the numbers. The problem with the Giuliani-Hennick call is that its timing is bounded by 3 parameters that don't fit. The call starts sometime after the Pentagon was hit at 9:41. Hennick tells Giuliani that fighters were dispatched 12 minutes ago to protect you, i.e. New York City, and we know that the only fighters sent to New York were sent from Otis Air Force Base at 8:46. 12 minutes after that would be 8:58. South Tower was struck at 9:03. The end of the Giuliani-Hennick call is followed immediately by the start of the Cheney-Giuliani call, see below, and the immediate collapse of the World WTC Tower at South Tower at 9:59. For the sake of argument, let's say that this conversation occurred 5 minutes after the Pentagon was struck. That would mean that the White House told Giuliani that fighter aircraft had been scrambled and sent to New York 7 minutes after 9:37 or 9:41, depending upon which timeline is used, or between 9:44 and 9:48. The final Cheney Commission report, released on July 22nd, makes no mention of any fighters being sent to New York at this time. The only scramble order even close to Giuliani's account is the scrambling of fighters from Langley Air Force Base to protect Washington at 9:23. roughly matches the timing of Giuliani's conversation with Hennick. The former mayor's testimony appears to be referring to the Otis fighters that had been directed to establish a combat air patrol over New York. But that poses another problem, a big one. If this is the case, then Giuliani's testimony places the Otis scramble order almost an hour later than the official NORAD and NEADS accounts, Northeast Air Defense Sector. Were these some other fighter aircraft? If so, they have not been mentioned. And why did Hennick not mention the Otis fighters that were, according to NORAD and eyewitness accounts, already in a very visible low-altitude combat air patrol over Manhattan? Anybody here that day didn't hear or see the fighters? Giuliani should have been able to see and hear them. Every other New Yorker saw them. Are we to believe that Giuliani somehow remained oblivious to the fighters' presence? Are we to believe that no police or fire official told him that the fighters were there, that he couldn't hear them? The only available benchmarks suggest that the call from Cheney took place much earlier than Giuliani claims. If we reference it to when the scramble order was issued at Otis Air Force Base, the source of New York's fighter cover, 8:46 a.m., then Giuliani spoke to Hennick sometime around 8:58 or about 5 minutes before Flight 175 struck at 9:03. If Hennick knew about other missing planes, he was obviously getting information, at least indirectly, from NORAD and NEADS. From whom? A political guy getting this information. The Secret Service seems the most likely candidate since there are numerous records of their active involvement by this time. At that time, it was also known that Flight 175 had been en route to Lower Manhattan for 16 minutes. There is no mention of Hennick issuing any warning to the New York mayor that a second plane was about to attack. How could the White House staffer have been certain about 12 minutes unless there had been a log? He was precise. Where is that log? Why was a political staffer in possession of better data than the mayor of New York? What does this suggest then about the timing of the call that Giuliani then received from Dick Cheney immediately after talking to Hennick? I'm quoting Giuliani. And I put down the phone and within seconds got a call in another room from the vice president. I walked over to that room, picked up the phone. The White House operator was on the phone and said, "Mr. Mayor, the vice president will be on in a moment." At that point, I heard a click. The desk started to shake and I heard Chief Esposito, who was the uniformed head of the police department. I'm sure it was his voice. I heard him say, "The South Tower is down, the tower has come down." The South Tower collapsed at 9:59 and was recorded live by a multitude of cameras. This is confirmation that Cheney was making command decisions and in all communications loops at least by this time. But if the White House call took place at 8:58, then more likely, in conformity with what we have already established, Dick Cheney was actually hands-on much, much sooner. As we have seen, Cheney was already in that role between 8:45, according to the FAA, and no later than about 9:15. The Secret Service, which had snatched Cheney out of his office after Flight 175 hit at 9:03, was fully informed of all developments, and they never left Dick Cheney's side. Quoting Giuliani, "So the police commissioner and I and the deputy police commissioner, we jointly decided we had to try to get everyone out of the building. So we went downstairs into the basement. We tried 2 or 3 exits, could not get out. I don't know if they were locked or blocked, but we couldn't get out." Here is more agonizing confirmation that no evacuation warnings had been issued for either tower prior to 9:02. Yet full knowledge of the danger was available to the National Command Authority that Flight 175 had turned toward New York at 8:42. 20 silent minutes passed when many of those who died could have been saved. The failure to warn the occupants of the South Tower, in spite of what is now an irrefutable record, is not only a grave insult to the people of New York, but the implications are compounded by the fact that Major Don Arias, the same NORAD officer who provided me with written confirmation of a live fly exercise, had a brother working inside the World Trade Center during the attacks. While the entire national command system failed to issue any warning to the people in the World Trade Center, Major Arias was compelled to leave his post long enough to place a phone call over a standard phone line to call his brother to warn him to get out of the building. Nobody else would do it. All of this is abundantly documented in Crossing the Rubicon. There are many, many other instances of criminal conduct on the part of our government on September 11th and since. I could talk about the still unresolved issue of massive insider trading on the world's financial markets. I could talk about a multitude of specific warnings that were received but ignored by George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and the entire administration. I could talk about how Retired FBI Special Agent John O'Neill was kept out drinking until 2:30 in the morning on the night before the attacks, in a pattern very reminiscent of what happened with several Secret Service agents assigned to protect President John Kennedy on November 22, 1963. One of the most insulting omissions of the Keene Commission is its failure to even discuss a $100,000 wire transfer to Muhammad Atta just a few days before the attack at the order of the head of Pakistani's intelligence services, the ISI, or that, as Paul mentioned, General Ahmad was having breakfast with Porter Goss, the man who is now being put forth to head our Central Intelligence Agency. But one thing I am certain of, and I believe I have proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt in crossing the Rubicon, I am absolutely certain that Richard Cheney was not only a planner in the attacks, but also that on the day of the attacks he was running a completely separate command and control and communication system which was superseding any orders being issued by the National Military Command Center, that's the Pentagon, or the White House Situation Room. To accomplish that end, he relied on a redundant and superior communication system maintained by the United States Secret Service in or near the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the bunker to which he and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice were reportedly rushed sometime after Flight 175 struck the South Tower. I will demonstrate that the Secret Service possessed radar screens which gave them and the Vice President, whose side they never left, real-time information as good or better than anything available to the Pentagon, the FAA, or anybody else, and that it was on the basis of that information that Cheney overrode and took complete operational control on September the 11th. I have shown that in what are called National Special Security Events. I encourage you to all Google that on your computers. The U.S. Secret Service is the supreme U.S. agency for operational control with complete authority over the military and all civilian agencies. I have established conclusively that in May 2001, by presidential order, Richard Cheney was put in direct command and control of all wargame and field exercise training and scheduling through several agencies, especially FEMA. This also extended to all of the conflicting and overlapping NORAD drills. I will also demonstrate that the tripod exercise being set up on September 10th in Manhattan was directly connected to Cheney's role in number 3 above. By sheer dedication and sacrifice through endless hours of labor and uncounted sleepless nights, a great many true Americans have kept 9/11 on the table. There's a few of them right here, a few of them here, there. 9/11 on the table for review and examination by the people of the world, and especially the people of America. It remains a clear and irrefutable challenge for all of us to persevere, to remain steadfast, to demand accountability, and to take whatever personal risks are necessary to see justice done and to unravel the confusing, perilous, and often frightening world which has presented itself to us in the years since. I welcome your questions.